Hello, welcome to another cloud computing class. Today we have a lot of work to do as we will implement our first user management API on top of the MiniFilm application. Just to remind you, the architecture of the MiniFilm, we have a database that is in MongoDB, we have a web server, and this web server actually is implemented as a backend service with Node.js. As a frontend, we use the Postman to make our calls to the web server, extract some data. We have a collection there that is called films to store our films, and today we'll create a new collection called users in order to store information about the users. For example, usernames, emails, password, any kind of information that we need to store. This will implement what we call the MiniFilm microservice. So let's start considering what it could be the best endpoints for me to use here. First, I have to think about a user registration. So whenever you register, probably you need to give a username, email, password, and in any case you will need to give more details, but for my service I will keep only this. After you register, you should be able to log in, and you will log in using your email and your password, and this data, it will be stored in the user's database. After you finish the registration, the login process, then you will be able to access your data. You will not be able to access data without being registered and logged in. And that's a typical scenario for every application today. The data for the films will come from the films collection. Everything will be in the same database, but in this case I will have two different collections. And this will implement our MiniFilm microservice. Now let's think about our first endpoint. I will call it API user register. And when I post here some data, for example, username, email, and password, that it will be in a JSON format, I will add my user to my database. So probably the response, it will be another JSON object that it will have all the information that I gave to my body when I did my post. One thing to consider here is that the password is hashed. This means that I encrypted the password, and that's a very good practice whenever we store user data in our database. We never store raw passwords directly as a field in my database. I need to encrypt and decrypt the password whenever I use it. One additional task today is to create validations for my API, and this includes some validations for the username. For example, the username, it should be a string, it's always required. What is the minimum and the maximum number of characters? The same for the password and the email. Now for the email, we have a new small validation here, that is the email validation. And as you imagine, every email should have an @ symbol. It should have, for example, the .com at the end. What are the basic validations for an email? We should always apply these validations on the user input in our API. The second API that we'll develop is the API user login. Now in this one, I will log in as a user after I register. So I will post some data, and this data is my email and my password. So I will use email and password to log into my platform, to my API, and the response, it will be actually what we call an Auth Token, an authentication key for me that will indicate that you now logged in and you have access to my system. So whenever you log in, I will give you back a key, and now you will use this key to get data from the database. Here I will also apply some basic validations for input, again the email validations and the password validations, as we will do with the registration process. The final endpoint that I will do, it will be actually an adaptation of the endpoints that I already have. For example, if you remember, we create an endpoint to get all the films from the database. Today we will allow only registered users to access the films. No one else will be able to access the data. So my endpoint, it will not be public, but it will be private, and you will need a key in order to access my data. So as a user, you will have to make a GET call, and this GET call should include as a header this Auth token, and that's actually the string that we created in the previous step. After this, you should be able to access your data as a JSON object, and you should be able to do whatever you like with my application. Alright, so we have a lot of work to do. And you imagine that today we'll spend a lot of time creating endpoints, validations, and finally we'll create the authentication process that follows this Auth version 2 protocol. Alright, so let's start. Okay, so I have my Visual Studio Code ready. I have also my MongoDB here, so I will probably need a connector. For this tutorial, I will use the MiniFilms films collection that we created a couple of weeks before, just to have some data for me to show when the user is actually registered and then logged in. I will also have here my Postman that I will probably need to use in order to make my calls and use my services. Alright, so I will go here to Visual Studio Code. I will open a new folder. I will put my folder in my desktop. I will call it MiniFilm Auth, and Auth for the authentication, because that's the aim of the today tutorials. Also, we'll see some validations as well, but in any case, create this and open the folder. Create a new terminal, and we can start doing a couple of things here that we already know. So we need to initialize a new project here of Node.js. We will clear my screen. I will install these packages that I need: Express, nodemon. I will need also a package called Mongoose, probably, because in any case we'll use MongoDB. .env for me to use this env file that allows me to hide my password for the MongoDB connection. In any case, we'll use it for other things as well today. And finally, we need to install also the body-parser that I probably know by now that this is a function for me, a library, to allow me to parse my data as JSON. Right, so until this is ready, what I can do, I can create here a new file. I will call it commands.md, and in this commands.md I will just keep track of the commands, because I might need to type a lot of things here, and as I go I will just keep track of what I installed before. Alright, now let me close the commands. Let me close this get started. I will just set up here a start for this nodemon tool. So nodemon app.js. I can also see here information about, the body parser version. My Mongoose version is 6.1.8. If I want to extract this information, I can do it from here. So let's create a new file. I would call it app.js, and we can start. We have a lot of things to do, so I would recommend you take it slowly, follow the tutorial, run it one more time by yourself. Every time just check your code, and you can break this video in small parts. Just make sure you understand all the process. For me now, the first thing always is to just create a new Express application by importing the appropriate libraries. I will import Express. I will create a new app that is an Express app. I will probably need to create the Mongoose variable for my library, Mongoose, that I will use. I want also to create this body parser that can actually help me to parse my data as JSON, so require this body parser. I also probably need to use this .env file. If you remember, we call it .env config, right? We don't need to create a variable for this file. I think I should be okay with this. Now, what else I need to do? I need to create a new app here that listens at port 3000, and usually we say it's a good idea to just console here a log message that says server is running, and just to go here and say probably I will need to connect with the Mongoose package here. I need to connect, and I need to provide this Mongoose URL that we don't have it yet. We'll find it, and I will just add here a message to say in my console, let's log this that DB is connected. That's fine. It's a good idea to always give some console logs here. Right, so the .env is installed. So what I will do, I will go here on the left side. I will create a new file. I will call it .env, and this environment file will host my DB connector. So I will just type here DB connector, and let me find my DB connector. I will go to Google Chrome. I will go to my databases in my MongoDB Atlas. I will click on connect, and I will select here to connect with Node.js, and that should be fine. Just copy this, make sure you connect here with the correct driver, Node.js, and the version 4 is okay. Now, it's exactly the same link that we used in the previous tutorials. So let me go back to my Visual Studio Code, paste this here, and as we say always, we need to update the password. In my case, is this one. And we need also to select the database that we will connect. That in my case, it should be MiniFilms. I can just validate this, going back to my MongoDB. In databases, I can see here browse collections, and just to make sure that my database name is MiniFilms. The collection is films, alright? So let me go back. It looks fine. I just save this and close it. Now I need to connect here to this env file, and the method to do this is to type here process.env.db connector, and that's fine. Okay, so for the moment what I have my app.js, I have my connector, and I have my server that is ready to start. So let me try a couple of things here. Let me just try npm start, and it should start here without any issues. The server is running, the DB is connected. That's fine. Now, the first thing for me would be to go on the left side and make a new folder. I will call it models. As we probably remember that we need always to create a model and link this model to our router, and the router will actually select the data and show it. That's what we will do one more time here. Now, the models, I will create a new file here. I will call it film.js. The first thing for me will be to extract the films from the database, show it in my API, and then I will start thinking about how I can apply some logic. For example, I have a user that wants to register, log in, and see the data. And then I will see how I can restrict access to the data. But first, let's make it work, and then we can think about how to add things on top of it. Right, so I will just add my model here. Alright, so I will say here constant mongoose equals require mongoose. So my mongoose package, constant, I will call it film schema, field schema, alright, requires this mongoose schema. It's actually mongoose schema, and I will think about now how I used to have it. So let me go back to my Google Chrome and see here that the films that I have in my films, in my MiniFilms database, we have a film name, film type, film year, film link. Alright, it should be exactly the same, and the types as well. So I will just keep it here simple. I will say film name, and this is of type string. And I have film type, and the type is string as well. I have film year. I'm just duplicating what I have in my database here, and the type is string, so I'm building my schema. And finally we have the film link, and the link has a type string. Right, that should be fine. I don't need anything else here. I will just have to obviously export my schema, and I will say here mongoose.model map the films, and the films again represents the database name. So if I go back to my MongoDB, and I can see here the collection is films, and my collection here is films, and map this to this film schema. Alright, and we should be ready. So the film is ready, my schema is ready, so I will go here on the left side again. I will create a new root for this, so I will create my roots here, and inside my roots I will create a new file. I will call it films.js. Now in this films.js I will select the data from the database and show the data to my user. So constant express, usual stuff, require the express package, and then this is a new router here that is an express router. We should know this by now. And I will just import my model. I will call it constant film. Alright, that's my model, and this require this model. Yeah, it's here, and the file is called film. And now I will say router.get. Let me create a path here where you will have an asynchronous request response to my database, because I probably know that this is the way to do it when we talk about connections to databases. And here I will say the films that are actually await a call to my film dot find, I think is the correct method. I think that's the one. Rest.send my films back to the user. All right. What I can do here also is to have a try catch, as we say usually. Try this code. Let me just wrap it in a try catch, just to have a good quality of code here. And let me just fix this spacing. Try this catch an error, and this error, I will just send back the error. Okay, so the message with an error. Now, one thing that we can do now is we can start setting the status to 400. That is, for example, the status of the error, and also the message. Now, we'll talk about the status in a second, where we'll start doing other things, but this is a way to set the status of the response to the client. Now, 400 means there is an error in our case. That's a code. All right, I think it's ready. Let's go and give it a go first before we do it. Just forgot that we need to create a middleware in the app. Now, in the app, we'll say constant films root, require this file that is something like that, I think. Sorry, something like that. It's in the same folder. Level of folders in the roots, and the file is called films. And app.use, give to the API film, I will call it like that now, make this with the film roots. Alright, so I'm just trying to apply some RESTful idea here, that we have an API and the API is film, and this is mapped to the film's root. Now, we will have another API that's called user, for example, and this would be another root for us. But for the moment, that root should be enough. So I have an error here. Let's see, probably I have to go back to my films.js, and as usual, module.exports, you never forget to say that you need to export your router. Now, if I go here, everything should be fine. Yeah, so don't worry if you see an error. Okay, I think it's good now. I will go to my Postman and give it a go. So let's have a new request to localhost 3000 API film. All right, film. Yeah, it works. So what we have here, we have the data from the database. I have 2 records for my films. If I go back to my Google Chrome, just to clarify, I have 2 records, and that should be fine. Now today I will work with these 2 records. Assume that we have more data here. Okay, so that's the first part. We should be able to do this fast and easy. We should be able to extract data from our database. Now, we will move to the second part, where we will actually create our user endpoints. So what we'll do now, I will go here on the left side, and I will create a new file inside the models. In this case, inside the model, I will call it user. Now the user is a user of my system, and this user has its own schema, right? So the schema of the user, it will be a little bit more complex than the schema of the film, that is quite simple, I would say. Alright, so usual stuff. Constant mongoose, require the mongoose package. And now we'll create a new schema for the user schema. That is a mongoose schema. And this schema follows a specific format. Let's say we have the username. And a username can be a type string. All right, we know that this is a string. Also, we can say that this is required. That's true. This means that the user should always give us a username. Obviously, we cannot register to a system without a username. This also has a minimum of 3 characters. So I apply some basic validations, and the maximum could be 256, maximum number of characters. Let's put the email. Email, again, it should be of type string, required, max, min. So I can just copy and paste exactly the same data here. And finally, we have the password. Well, probably we'll have also the date, but this is the password. This is the 3 information that we need from the user. And the password is also type string. It also is required. I would say, for the email, the minimum I will ask 6, and the maximum for the password will be 1024. And this is the case because we will hash the password. So we'll use a hash function to hash our passwords. So it's good to have a very, very long size here. So our hash function will never fail. What else I need? I need the date. All right, the date, I know that the date, it should be type, I forgot the comma here, I think. Yeah, type date, and the default here always is date.now. And I think we are good. One last thing I always forget is to export this. So I can say here module.exports the Mongoose model and the model name that is, sorry, the model name in the database that I don't have yet. I will call it users. Since I have films, I will have also users. And here I will map it with my user schema. I think it's fine, the user. Just let me review it one more time. We have the username, the email, and the password. And we have some kind of validations here, requirements for us. Whenever we insert data, we need to make sure we follow these requirements. That's what we'll do in the validations. All right, so let me close the user now. And I will go here to the roots. And I will create a new file. I will call it auth.js. Now, auth.js, it will be my file for the whole part of the authentication. So I will do a lot of things here, okay? And I will actually map this file to my API and to my endpoints in a second. For the moment, constant express. This is an express app that requires the express package as usual. I need to create a router again. This is an express router. This is a second router file. Okay, so a couple of things that I might need. Probably I will need this users file. So I will say here constant user, and this requires this file that is the models and my user model that just create. So I will just have it here. In any case, I will probably need to use it. And that should be fine for the moment. Let's create our first post here. So let's say the user will post something like API user register. So register, it will represent my registration endpoint. And this will be an async call because I will register my user, I will insert the data to the database. And here, I will have to add my code, a lot of code probably to organize a lot of details as we'll see today. But in any case, let me just create my endpoint to have it ready. So module.export, now that I always forget about the exporting this. So now you have it in your mind, you can do it. And let me go to the app. Okay, so what I will do, I will create another endpoint here. So I will call it here user root. So I have a second endpoint in my case where you will have to go to roots and access this auth. All right. Now also I can call it auth root. Maybe I will call it auth root just to keep track of my naming here. All right. So auth root, it should be fine. And these are my two endpoints. So I will say app.use. Whenever you go to API and then user, hit this auth root and I will redirect you to the appropriate endpoint. For example, for registration, you will go API user and here I will go to register. All right. For login, I will have something like this. Let me just create the login endpoint here. Router.post login, and you can go here in your app API user login. And we say that this is something that has to do with the REST principles of the idea of creating a clean and nice represented API. Now, I will go back to my auth. I have my endpoints ready. I don't have anything here. So my first thing to do is to say, let me console log just to see the request.body. Remember, the request.body is what the user will send me. So I will go back to my Postman here, and I will try my new endpoint just to see that everything is fine. So we say API user register. That's my endpoint. So I have to do a post, because if I do a get, probably will fail. So let me just send this. Alright, I think let me go back, register, and my API is API user. Alright, post. Okay, probably I didn't save it, so if you see an error, go back, save your code, come back here. I can go back now to my code here and I can see here the undefined. That's because I actually imported my body parser, but really I didn't use it. So in my app.js, what I have to do, I will have to go somewhere here on the top before I start doing my middlewares and say app.use this body parser .json, and now you should be able to get your data. So I will go back to my endpoint here, send the request, go back here. I didn't send anything, so yes, it's obviously to get an empty dataset. So let me go back and say I want to set as body raw JSON data that is of the format username, the name is Stelios, email, the email is, let's say, stelios@cloud.com, and finally, just let me increase the size here a little bit easier for you to see, and finally my password, that in my case is just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we say 6 characters. Now I don't apply any validations yet, I'm just showing here, a sample of data. Right, so let me cancel this and send it one more time. And let me go back to my Visual Studio Code. Yes, I can see here I have my data. Good news. Now, I will go back to my auth.js and start considering here what is the best way for me to control some basic validations. Right, we said that we need that our dataset, when we insert, for example, a new user, so if I go back to the user, it has to be always, required. Or the minimum is 6 and the maximum is 24. I have to enforce the user, whenever the user enters data, to follow this particular schema format. So I will go here on the left side and I will create a new folder. I will call it validations. And inside the validations, I will create a new file. I will call it validation.js. So this validation.js, it will help me to actually create the basic validation rules. To do this, I will need to install a nice package that is called joyi. Alright, so this package called joyi, that I will just do it now, Ctrl+C to break my terminal, and npm install joyi will give me all the validations that I need. It's pre-configured nicely for me to just apply. Just to keep track of my commands, I will just keep this npm joyi here in my MD file, and that should be okay. So I will go back to my where I was in the auth.js, and I will see here, I have to apply some validations for this request.body, and because I don't have all the data here and all this code here, I just created a new file called validation, and I will try to link this to my auth.js. So I will have all my validations here as a function, and I will reuse it as I go. Now, I will have to say here constant joyi, that's my package that I just installed, require this joyi package, and that should be okay. I just imported my library, and let me create a new function here. I will call it register validation, and this validation will accept data. Data is my body that I will give to my function, and it will return back the validation applying the joyi requirements. Now, what are the joyi requirements? We need to create what we call the schema validation. I call it like that, you can call it as you like. And the schema validation is a joyi object. We have to follow this format. Joyi object means follow the joyi object validation rules, where we have a username in my body, and the username is joyi dot, it should be a string. We say this in my user. It should be also required, so I can say here required, okay. It should be minimum 3 characters, we say, maximum 6 characters, 256, forgot the 256, and yeah, that should be enough, right? So I'm just trying to map here the validations, applying this joyi library to this user.js, because I say these are the data that I expect you should control the validations in your code. The second one is the email. And the email, again, is a joyi object. This is a string, and this is also required with minimum 6 characters. This is what we said before, the maximum 256. And one more thing here, this is an email, so can you please check the email validations? And these email validations will check, for example, if you have .com, if you have the @ symbol, so you follow the format of an email. We'll see in a second how we try this and the errors that we'll see when we use wrong type of emails, but probably you imagine what it could be, right? It could be a message that your email format is wrong. Password is the last one, and the password will be a string. It's required, and it has min 6 and max 256 characters. I think it should be fine. I think 1024. We said that the password, it should be long. Now my function here always returns something back, and this is this schema validation, validate my data that the user will give me, right? So for example, here I have data in the register validation, so use this data in the schema validation to validate the data. And now this will give us back the validations using the library. So what I have to do, I have to say here module.exports, I will say like that, .register validation, and I will explain you in a second, equals register validation. I can export specific functions because in this file, in the validations, probably I will have a lot of validations. For any user input, I will need to make validations. For example, if I have a login user, I need to check that the user gave me an email and the email is the correct one, and the password, right? So I will need to apply the same rules, more or less, for the login process. So for this reason, I can actually export here every function separately. In my case, I just do it like that, and that's fine. Right, so the validations is okay. What we have to do is now to apply it. So I go back to my auth, and I will just say here constant register validation, and this is require the validations and the validation file. Right, so I'm able now to import my file. I will import it like that because in a second we'll see that when you have multiple functions there, you can add it here. For example, you can have the register validation, the login validation, all right? We don't have it yet, but we'll create in a second. So it's a good idea to just import everything together in a single line following this format. Okay, so let's apply our first validations. So I will go here, I will just get rid of this request.body here, and I will try to validate my body and send back the result. Probably I will also don't want this console.log now. So I will say, let's send back the validations of your function. So what you will say, a register validation of your request body. So I will validate my body and send back the results to the user. Okay, let me delete here. I'm just sending back this one. Now, if there is a problem, I will probably see the error. If there is no problem, I will see the body. Now, let me go back to my Postman and give it a go. Right, so I am here and I'm just sending the request, and probably I didn't start my server. So let me go back and start the server. All right, everything looks okay. Let me go back and send the request. And I receive back my body. So I send my body, that's my body. I receive back my body. And it says here the value is this, that's the data. Now let me try some errors. We say that the username, it has to be minimum 3 characters. Let me put 1 character. We'll put just S. Let me send it. And yes, I can see there is a value and an error in this case. And the error says, you know, your message is that your username length must be at least 3 characters long. Yes. I applied my validation, simple as that. Now let me put it back as Stelios, and let me mess around with my email. So I will just put some random text there that is not an email for sure. Let me send it back, and I can see a value and the error, and the message that is email must be a valid email. Okay, it works. Now let me try with the password, because we say password has to be how many characters? I think 6 minimum. So let me send this. And I can see here the password length must be at least 6 characters long. That's great. So using the joyi package, we were able to apply basic validations to our data. In my case, I just put here again the correct password, and that should be fine. If I send it one more time, I should see the value without an error. What I would do is, let me create a small error here again. Let me see how I can actually isolate the error, because I don't want to send to the user all this information back. Probably I want to send something like, the message is this one. So let me go back to my Visual Studio Code, and let me say this one. Let me do this. Let me just create here a constant, and if I say constant error like that with the curly brackets, I will be able, when I run this, to jump directly to the error. So avoid the value, go to the error. So isolate to the error. So let me send this back, and let me go back here, just save this. Okay, let me send this back. Alright, I don't send anything. Right, I forgot to send my error back. Res.send and send the error. So if you don't send the data, you will not see data. So let me send the data. And I was able now to jump directly to the error, so I don't see any value anymore. Error, and if I go to details, and then I jump inside this array into the message, probably I would be able to isolate the message. Alright, so if I go here and say, can you enter to details? Details. Let's go back to Postman. So I want to enter here. So let me send this. Okay, I enter here. Now I need to extract this record and enter into the message, but you can see this is a kind of list, as we say in Python, for example. So I have to go and say enter at index 0, because that's my first one, to get rid of the brackets. So let's get rid of the brackets. Yes, that's fine. And now extract the message. So I will say here message, only the message. Let's go back, and I can see only the message. So I was able to navigate myself inside this long JSON file, extract the message. I don't want to send it like that. I want to, create a nice representation of the message. So I would say send back a message, and the message, or let's leave it like that because this is something we can return. The message is the error that you will have actually from your error message. So I just wrap it up in a nice JSON format, go back and let's send it one more time, and now yes, I can see here. Let's try another error. What I will do, I will put here my email problem, destroy your email, send it back. It should say email must be valid. And I can also just try one more time with my name. There are so many small validations that I can apply, and probably everything should work fine. That's because of this joyi file. Alright, so yeah, I will return back to everything is normal and just send, and I will see that I don't get anything back because for not error cases, I don't receive anything. So I go back to my Visual Studio Code and I will continue fixing this. Now, if there is not an error, probably you will have an error because in your code, because it says, I'm trying to extract the error, but there is no error. So what I have to do, I have to go here and say, if there is an error in your code, then apply this one. So don't try to send the error if there is no error. That's the first validation here. What else I can do? I can do the following. I can actually insert the data to my database if there is no error, and that should be fine. Let me try to do this. What I will do, I will create a constant user, and this is a new user. We have to prepare here the username, as we say, from the body, request.body.username, name. Just to double check, this is what I sent, username. This is what I have to use in my code here. Let's extract the email. That's the second request.body.email. That's the second parameter that I use. And finally the password. That's the request.body.password. So I have username, email, and password. So having this, I will create something like constant saved user and await here, await, and I can use await because I already used the async here, the asynchronous call. Await, what I want to await, user, that's my user, dot save, and we say in MongoDB I can use this save to save the data. Rest.send the saved user back to me, and that should be fine. So this code here, what it will do, it will save the data. This code here is my validation. So let's just add some comments here. This is validation to check user input against my requirements, and this is the code from here, starting from here, code to insert data. Again, somebody will say, why we didn't use the try catch? Probably because I forgot it, but you should not forget never the try catch. So try this one, catch the error, and if there is an error, send it back, res.send the message, okay, message with the error. Now, one thing here that we need to remember is that we can actually send the status to 400, and this means that there is an error, all right? So when is the error, we can send the status back. Okay, let me go back here, and I will do the same for this one, status 400, and I will show you the example, all right? So status 400 again means there is an error. The request is bad. You have to fix it. Now, I will go back to my Postman and try a problematic record, this one, and send it. And I can see, my email must be valid email, and the status here, it says 400 bad request. Good stuff. Now, if I just send my correct record, and there is probably an error, we'll see what's happening. I have to retrieve back my normal status. So probably I have an error. Let me see what I did wrong. All right, so let me save it and send it again. Okay, yes, I can see here that I probably didn't save it correctly. Res.send saved user. Yeah, it works fine now. So just, always save your code before you try it. Okay, so go back to my Postman, and I send my data to my service, and I can see here I received back a record, and everything looks fine. This is the record from the database. Now, if I send again and again, as you can see, I create new users. Now, how many times I press here? Like 3, 4, 5 times. I will create 5 times the same user, and that's a bad practice. You don't want to create the same user again. What is the validation here? Probably we need to check the email. If the email is in the database, please do not insert your user. So what I will do, I will go back to my MongoDB, refresh here my web page. I will probably see the new user setup here. Yes, the users, the collection, and I can see so many users of Stelios because I just press it so many times. So what I will do, I will first start deleting here the users. I don't want to have them duplicated users here, okay? So just delete all the users from here, and then I will apply a basic validation where I will actually allow my user control in terms of their email. All right, so this is my user that already inserted, Stelios. I have Stelios here with this particular email, and this particular email should be unique. So let me go back to my Visual Studio Code. So I just kept one record there, and I will go here on the top and say, before you insert the data, I will apply another validation, validation 2. This is validation 1. The validation 2 to check if user exists. If the user exists, I will not add the user in the database. That's what I will do. So constant user exists, and I will say here await. I will check if the user is there. So I will say user dot find 1. Probably it will be 1 only because I will control it from now on. And I will check if the email of the user in my database equals to the email of the request.body.email. So if this is correct, if this is the same, if this user exists, indeed, if the user exists, in this case, I will return, so return res.send, and probably I have to put here the return as well, I forgot it. So in the previous, just good practice to have the return here in the if statement. Res.send, well, res.status first, let's put it 400, send back a message that says the user already exists. All right, so user already exists. In this case, I'm just controlling this before I insert the data. If the user doesn't exist, I will continue in my code. So let me go back to my Postman and now give it a go. I have Stelios here. If I try it, it should say that the user already exists. All right. Now let me create another user, Mary, and mary@cloud.com with the same password. That's fine. Let's send this. I just created Mary. Let's resend this. The user already exists. So that's a very important validation, so we don't duplicate our users in the database. Now let me go back to my Visual Studio Code and let me review my code here. The first validation was to validate the input user, and I created this validation file, and this validation file actually helped me to apply some basic validations using this joyi package, so I don't have to implement all these functions, count how many characters I have, if there is an @ symbol somewhere, or if there is .com or something. It's well maintained and we can just use it directly, avoid implementing what is there already for us. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. These are the basic validations used from anybody that develops software. Right, so obviously I will have my login validation, so it's a good idea to do it now. So what I will do, I will just copy and paste the code. I will call it login validation. I will think for a second, what it can be a login validation. The user will give me email and password, and I will validate the email and the password. If the user exists, if the password is correct, and then I will give you access to something. So I don't need really the username, I just need the email and the password. So just remove the username, and that should be all. So I just have the login validation already, just removing one line. I will just copy here and export this, and I will call it login validation, obviously. And login validation, all right, and that's fine. Now I will go back to my auth. I will import this here, and that's the beauty of importing everything together in one line. So in this file I have all my validations, and I have different functions for validations, so that's the login validation now. Okay, so I have my router.post for the register, and I think I finished with the functionality of this. I can register, I can control errors for the user input if the user exists, I can insert the data, all right, and I insert the data as you see here. Now, one of the things that probably I don't like here is that I import the password from the user directly to my database. So somebody can go here and see, Mary, when Mary registered, her password is 123456, and I can see it here, right? So it's always a bad idea to actually save the passwords directly to our database. What we have to do is to create a hash representation, encrypted representation of our password. So we need to use a hashing function, import this data. The hashing function will generate something that it's quite difficult to decrypt and understand what is the password. And putting some randomness on top of this, we will have a password that is actually encrypted, and in our case, it will be hidden. So how we'll do this? Okay, let's go back to my Visual Studio Code. I will do this small thing at the end when I have everything working here in my post. So I will go to my terminal, I will break it, Ctrl C. So the library is called Npm Install Decrypt Js. Now this library again will decrypt my password. Whenever I save data or whenever I log in, I need to decrypt and check the password against the user. Now let's install this. Again, I will just copy this command, save it to this commands.js. I can add some comments here if I like, something like, install the joyi package for validations. If I want to do this, I can add another comment here that says install the Encryption Decryption library. Okay, that's my library. And here I don't need to add comment for this one. I already know what is this about. Okay, so let me close the commands. So let me start doing here my encryption decryption. I have somehow to represent this with this decrypted value. Okay, let me first go on the top, constant bcrypt.js. I will use the same name, so we can actually remember at some point what is the library, so we don't have to go and search for it. So Decrypt Js, and this Decrypt Js requires this library. And here, before I create my password, in this one, in my model, I will just try to see how I can hash using this Decrypt Js. So first thing to do is to create something that's called salt, and the salt will actually add some randomness on top of this and generate the complexity of our key. So in my case, I will say await decrypt js, generate a salt, and here in parentheses I will put 5, a random number, and this 5 in my case, what it will do, it will give me the complexity of my hash. Now we'll discuss more about these things in the class. So the second thing to do is to actually generate a password that is hash password, and this, it will be await, and I say await because these are functions that they call this kind of algorithms, and sometimes they might take some time, so you need to wait for the results to come back. So decrypt js, and I would say hash my request.body.password. So take the password from the body and give me back a hashed representation. So decrypt js, and I would say hash my request.body.password. So take the password from the body and give me back a hashed representation, following this salt. And the salt will always give me also the idea of not just generating a hash value, but generate different hash values for the same password, right? I don't want, for example, all the users that they use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to have the same hash, right? They have to have different hash keys. I save this and I will give it a go. I will go back to my Postman. I will go actually back to my MongoDB. I will refresh here, and I would see that I have Stelios and Mary from before. Or I will delete these users because I want to save now the hashed representation of the data, not the actual password, right? Here it should be a long string. Let me delete these 2 users here, and this is now nice and clean. And let's give it a go. So let's create first Mary. I have an error, I will fix it. I go back here to my server. Yes, it's always a good idea to start the server. Let me go back to my Postman, send this. I have another error, I will fix it again, don't worry. So let me see what I did wrong. Yes, what I did wrong is that in this hash I forgot to add my salt. I have to use this salt that I just created, and this salt will add this randomness. So I save it again, and I go back to my Postman, and I send this. And yes, I will see now here that this is the password of Mary, and the password is encrypted. Behind this encrypted password, we hide this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, if I go again back to my MongoDB, I will refresh here. I will see that from now on, I follow specific standards. I never save the password to my database. Go back to your Postman, and let's add also Stelios one more time. And at least we have 2 users. Send for Stelios. Stelios is now saved in my database. Send again. User already exists. Let's try the validations one more time. Email should be wrong. Okay, that's fine. It seems that everything works fine. Now let me go back to my Visual Studio Code and just wrap up the discussion here, and by adding a comment and say, here in this line 24, I created a hashed representation of my password. Okay, and that's quite important. Alright, what I will do now, I will just go here and I will focus on my login. So I finished with the registration. I did a lot of things. Just to recap, we check the user input, we check if the user exists, create a hash representation. If everything is fine, insert the data, but I don't insert the password from the body. I insert the hashed version of the password that I already created a salt. And also don't do the same mistake as me. Don't forget to put your salt after your password here inside the hash function. Okay, save this. And let's go to the post here, and we'll try now to create this login function. All right, so the login function, we'll do a couple of things. First, we'll check the user input, if the input is okay in terms of validations. Second, if the password is correct, okay. And then third, if everything is fine, you should be able to log in. Now, you should be able to log in. We'll see how we'll represent this. All right, we'll represent it with a token. So we'll do authentication for this. For the moment, what we'll do is, let me just start by doing, the basic stuff here. I will have to copy and paste code from here. I don't want to, do the same things again and again. So I will just copy this, the first validation, because it will be probably the same things. Validation 1, check the user input. But in this case, I don't want to register, but I want to run the login validation. And if everything is, okay, that's fine, continue. So I just run a new validation here. We have exactly the same errors with the same validation, so I don't have to change anything. The second that I will try is to see if the password is correct. That's the second validation here. So validation 2, to check user password. Now, there is a small issue here. We need to decrypt the password, because the password in our database, if we go back to our database, is actually encrypted. So I cannot compare 1, 2, 4, 5, 6 with this hash key. I have to take this, decrypt, and compare it. But we'll do this. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code and try to do it. So I will create a new variable. I will call it constant user. And let's see, first of all, if we can actually, if we have a user, right? Because you can say, I want to log in, but is your username correct? Yes, I can do that following the same idea as before. So before we even try the password, why we don't even check if the user exists? So the same validation here, I can apply here as well. All right, so let me go here and say validation 2 to check if the user exists. And I will just put this validation 3 to check if the password exists. Is the correct one, not exist. Validation 3. So constant, I will call it user now, because I want to just extract data for all the users and use this user for everything, for password, for email, right? We'll see how we'll do these things. So I will say here, user await user find one, where the email is the email from your body. If the user does not exist in my case, because I want to see if the user does not exist, so I will just change this to false. Message sent, user does not exist. So how you will want to log in with a user that does not exist. Now somebody can say, maybe we should say here username or email is or password is wrong. But in my case, I have a message here just for me while I develop. Probably it would be a bad idea to leave it after in production like that, that it should say username or password are incorrect. Okay. Now in my case, that should be fine. So when I want to hit the login page, I will have to give the correct validations. For example, an email that is an email, a password that is 6 characters long, all these things. And I have also to pass through the validation that the user exists. If the user does not exist, I give the error. And in any case, I will continue now. So the third validation, as we say, is to check the password. So I will go here and I will create a variable called password. Let's call it validation to validate my password. This will say await, because I will use the Decrypt Js. As we say, we need to encrypt decrypt. I will say compare what the user will give me, request.body.password, with your user password. And the user password is this user from the database. I don't need to do another call, extract the data. I extract it only once here, and then I will use it also here for checking if the user exists, and I will use it a second time here to validate my password. Okay, so if this password validation fails, when I will have to return a message, so I will just copy this whole thing, because I will probably return something similar, but I will say here password is wrong. Alright, so your password is wrong, and I will return this message. Just to clarify again, first validation, we check user input against to the validation requirements. Second, we check if user exists. If the user doesn't exist, you cannot proceed. Third one, if your password is wrong, you cannot proceed. Before we see what we'll do after, For example, I can say here res.send, just for testing reasons now, success. So success means you pass all the validations, and you can actually now log in. Now, let's go and test it. Go back to your Postman. All right, so I will go here, API user, and we say login, because this is my login route. And I say I will need to use only email and password. Now, what I will do, I will just leave it this register. I will open a new window here. So I will have here the register and here the login. Right, I have two windows. I don't have to always go back and find what was the last call I did to change it. All right. So let's make here a post. I will go here, take all the data from here, and I will say I want to post raw JSON one more time for the login in this case. So I would say login here. I don't really need that username because you log in with email and password. So okay, let's try it. Send this back. There is an error. Let me go and fix it. Probably there should be an error always. Okay, it says here the user exists is not defined. So let me find where I have this. If user exists, I say if user. If there is not user, so I name this user exists, but I type user, and then I say if the user does not exist. So make sure that the two variables here match. Now let me go back to my Postman. Give it a go one more time. It says success. I use the correct email and the password. Let's try one after the other. The first thing, let's check the validations. Let me send this with a wrong email. It says email must be valid. Okay, let me do this. Let me just put the password here. That is wrong. 2 characters only. It says the password must be 6 characters. Okay. Let me just put the wrong password now. So instead of 1 to 5, I will make it 7. It should say your password is wrong. Yes. What else we have to check? Let me go back to my code. So I check the validations. I check the user. I didn't check if the user does not exist. So let me go here and say a new user that is Tom. Let's say Tom does not exist. So user does not exist. So what I can do, I can go here and say, well, I will register user Tom, and this Tom has this email. Let me send this. I register my user here, and I will go to the second window here and say, now can I try with Tom that didn't exist but now exists? Success. So I was able to control all the process of creating the login validation. We have register and login. We did a lot of work. You should be proud of yourself, okay? That's the essence of doing an API. We will always need to control all the small details. Okay, so one last thing that is not so easy, but it's essential, is to define what is the success. What means success? Before I do that, just let me reduce here the spacing. Success means that you give the user the option to log into your service. But what means login? Login means that you have access to something, right? For example, as a user now, I should be, have access to the films. And we say that before everybody has access to the films. Now, only users that are registered and logged in, following all this process, you should have access to these films. To do this, we will use what we call an authentication token. The token, you will give you back a string that is actually a key, let's call it a key, and you will use this key to access the films. Only users that have this key, they will be able to access the films. Okay, so let's do this. First, let's Ctrl+C to break our terminal. And I will install a package that is called JSonwebtoken. So npm install JSonwebtoken. Let me install this. And also I will add it in my commands here. And I will just say install the JSonwebtoken, or you can put it with capital, package for generating Auth Token. Tokens, we can say. That's the command. Alright, so I will go back to my auth.js, and the first thing I will do is I will generate a token. So when the user is actually successful, what I will do, I will just generate a key for you, and you can use this key wherever you want. So here I will say generate an Auth token for your user. Now I will say here constant token, we'll call it token, why not? And you will need to use this library that I didn't even import it. So go up, and somewhere here, for example, you can say JSON web token requires this library, JSON web token. Okay, we have this now. I use the whole name again just to remember what is the package. So slowly we start remembering the names as well. Okay, so what you will do is you will use this JSON web token to sign and generate a token based on your user data. So I will say, take the ID of the user, user.id, and take something that is mine, that I will give it now. I will call it token secret, and we'll discuss about token secret in the class. And take this token secret and generate a token. Now, again, because this is a token secret, probably a secret to my system, and it will apply only for this program, I will have to put it in my .env file. So I will go here and say token secret equals, here you can add whatever you like. In my case, I will add AAA, BBB, and CCC, alright? And you can add some numbers here as well. Whatever you like. The token secret, it will be something for you to generate tokens. Only this token secret can generate these tokens. Any token secret that you use different will generate different tokens. Again, we will discuss more about this token secret in the class. For the moment, I go back to my auth.js, and probably you know that to access this env file, you need to go through this token secret. Okay, so what I did, I access my, I forgot here to close this. I create a token, and I have to remove it from here probably. I create a token. Let me just close this from here. I create a token. The token is a JSON web token. It will be generated by the library. And I sign the token as user. So the user has a particular ID. So I use the user ID to create the token, plus a token secret. That is my way for me to create individual web tokens. So I will press an enter, and I will say, send back. Actually, what you will do is set the header, and I will explain you in a second about the header. Set the header to Auth token. So you will put in the headers what you return back to the user, a header with the token, and also you will send as body, as response, the token itself with the token. So whenever you send back to the user, you send the token twice. Once you will show it nicely in the response, and also you will set the headers to this token. It's important because the other software now will access the headers to extract the token. Okay, so again, we'll talk about authentication and the concept of tokens, the concept of signing, and the headers in the class. Now let me go back to my Postman and see how this looks like. So if I try here to send this, probably I didn't start my server. Okay, npm start. No errors here, that's fine. Go back to your Postman, send this, and you see here the token. So yes, you were able to generate for this user, Tom, a key. And this key is only for user Tom. Let me try to log in as Stelios and just send this. I will have another token, and this token actually is based on my ID as user in the database. Now, another thing that is important, I will say in the header, there is a parameter that is called Auth Token. I created myself, and this is the key for you. Alright, that's the key. So you can also have it here, and you can reuse it in your code. You can extract it from the header and just reuse it and say, this user is actually registered and logged in. You can have access to the system. Okay, so what I will go now here in the body. I will copy this. Okay, so I have to provide this key to the user. And as a user, if I want to access the films, for example, I will go here and say, I want to go to localhost, import 3000 your API films, all right? And when I send this get, what I will see the films here, okay? I don't know if it was film or films, maybe it was film. All right, it was film. So I will see here the films from my database, but can I see it without being a registered user? The answer is no. This means that when you send this request, you should give your key. And your key for Stelios, for example, is this long string. Okay, let's see how we can do this. Now, to do this we need to create a verification process for the key. We need to check, for example, if the key is correct, I will give you access. If not, what I will do, I will just deny your access. Now, let me go back to my Visual Studio Code and do the last part, that is the verify token. Now, I will create a new file here and I will call it verify token. And if I verify the token, I will give you access. If not, you will not be able to see anything. And I will use this verify token and I will see how I will actually link this to my films. That's what we're trying to do here. Alright, so for the verify token, I will say constant JSonWebToken. One more time, require, I will use this library, the JSON web token. And now I will also need to create a function here to control this. So I will create a function. I will call the function auth for authentication. All right. And I will request a response. In this function, I will use also the next, because the next, I will explain you, is the idea of jumping between middlewares, because now we will go through the verified token and I have to return back. I use the next when I need to go through files and return back. Okay, so I will say, the constant of my token, can you extract the token from the header? So request.header, and the header, it should be auth token. As a user, whenever I actually try to access something, let me go back to my Postman. What I have to do is I have to give here in my app API film, I have to give here an auth token, right? I have to provide my token. My token is something like that. And when I send this token here, when I send this, I should see the data. If my token is not correct, or I don't provide a token, in this case, for example, let me delete this, you should not see the data. So you should see the data only where there is an auth token in the header. In my case is here, okay? I just put in the params, so that was a mistake, in the headers. And when there is a header with this auth token, then you should be able to access your data. And obviously the token, it should be the correct one. So let me go back to the Visual Studio Code. Alright, so I just created here this token that represents the token from the header. So if there is no header, if there is no token in the header, just a small validation here, what you will do, you will return back a rest.status. The status here, it could be 401. That means access denied. And send here, I forgot my dot here. Send here what you will have to send. Let me just send a message. And the message says access denied. How you want to access if you don't give me a token? That's the first thing. But if there is a token, in this case, let's check the token if it is the correct one. Now again, here I will make this try catch, so I can also send back another message here, that your token is invalid. Let me just put it here. I just pasted, I copy and paste the code from there. It's the same thing. Invalid token. Again, I can show the same message, access denied, and you don't know if the token is there or not, whatever. But in my case, I just want to control the errors, so I put different error messages. And I will do this. I will say constant verified is JSonWebToken dot verify, and to verify, use the token that the user gave you, and also use the key, this token secret. So we use the token secret from the .env file to verify our token, and then just send back to the user. The user is verified, and next means continue doing your stuff, jump to the next middleware, and probably access the films, do whatever you need to do. So again, this verified token works always like that. More or less, this code, it can be reusable for any kind of scenario. Maybe you can actually, customize it if you like, but you can have this code and use it also for your coursework, because it will actually verify your tokens. Now, I will go back to my films now, here into my roots films, and I will use this verified token. That's what I have to do. So I have to just save this file, I have to go back to my films, and here, to use the verify, you will have to go between this root and the async and say, can you use the verify? Use the verify, and the verify will tell you what to do. That's the only thing I have to do. Obviously, before I use the verify, I have to import this. So I will say here constant verify, I have a typo, require this verify token file. Alright, so let me save it and I will fix it, but that's fine, there should be a small error. Alright, my mistake I think is that if I go back to the verify token, I didn't actually export. Yes, I always forget this, right? Module.exports the auth. If you don't export this, you will not be able to use it in the middleware, and that's totally fine. Okay, so if you see an error, you don't say, oh my god, I did something wrong. Probably you forgot to do something very simple as this one. Okay, now whenever I want to access the films, I will go through the verify, and the verify will go to this verify token file. Probably I should call it verify token, and I can change it just to keep the code clean and nice. So the verify token is to the verify token file. Just save it, should be the same. And let's go to the verify token file, and this verify token file, what it does, it takes the token from the header and checks if this token is correct, and if you are correct, you can continue. If you are not correct, you have an access denied or invalid token. And this next is the key here to jump to the next middleware. That means when I go here to the films.js, I can actually, do my stuff and select the data, do whatever I want. The time of testing, what I will do, I will go here in the second window. I will use Mary in my case. Let's use Mary. Create a token. I will copy this token. As you can see, I just copy it from here. All right. I will go to the third window here. That is actually my get to the films. I will go to the headers. I will go here and say Auth Token. This is the name. Put the value here and send it. And you can see the data. Yes, but you can say, well, I saw it before. Let's try something now. I will just delete the last letter of my token. And what I have to see is a message that says your token is incorrect. Yes, invalid token. You cannot see the data without being a registered user, without login and take a token. Alright, let me fix this and try it again. I should see the data. Let's do this. Let's remove the token from here. Let's delete this. And I don't send the token. So it says access denied. Means that you don't have a token actually. Now let me put again the token, send it back. Alright, I have it. Now, let me try to use the whole thing one more time. I will go here. I will create a new user called Nick. I will create my Nick user with a password. In this case, I will try 123 just to have a different password here. I will create my new user. Nick is created. Nick's password is hashed. I will go to log into my service. I will say I have a user Nick and the password is 123123. And before I do the correct password, I will put an incorrect password to check it. The password is wrong. Your email probably must be valid. So let me fix this. Let me now be a successful login user. Yes, success means you take a token. If you see here Auth Token, this means you are good to go. I copy this token. I go to the third window, and now I'm ready to access and sneak my data. I will take out the Auth Token here. Remember, this is in the headers. I will send me this. It will say you cannot access this. I will put Auth Token empty. I will send this. You access deny this. I will put my token here. I will just remove the last letter. Send this invalid token. And the last test. Hopefully, as sneak now, I can access my data. Yes, you can see your films. So we created the whole life cycle of developing an API for the user management. Now, if I go back to my Visual Studio Code and conclude my discussion, we have to remember that the commands, we can have it somewhere as a reference and just copy paste whenever we need, but we need to know which library we need for what kind of problem. The second is that this verified token, we can reuse this code as many times as we want, because at the end of the day, it's the essence of validations based on the authentication protocol, what we call OAuth version 2. And we will discuss it in class in detail. And finally, the most important part is this auth.js file that we created the logic of my program. Validation 1 for registration, check the user. Validation 2, check if the user exists. Then create a hash representation of your password. Insert your password hashed in your data, save the data. When you actually have a user, you can then log in. And if you log in, you have to pass these two validations at the beginning, check the user input, check if the user exists, check the password, the third one, and then generate the token. Success for login means a token. When you generate the token for the user, then you send back as a header, alright, and then you can extract it. In our case, what we did, we tried by hand. Usually the front end will do these things, like take the data, isolate the authentication token, and then reuse this in the next call. In our case, we did it by hand, and that should be fine. What we have to do here, and one last thing, is that you import this verified token library that we just created, let's call it function, and to use it, we just have to add it here in our router.get as a second parameter. Every time you use these films endpoint, you will go through the verified token. Now, some endpoints need the verified token, some not. For example, if I want to show all the data to my users, not necessarily the users have to be registered to access this. But for some cases, I need the users to be registered. And the user that is not registered cannot really access the data. Alright, so that would be all to this long tutorial. I think now you should be ready to start with your coursework, and you have everything you need to create, I would say, a production-ready software for user management and an API that you might need to create. Okay, so I will see you again soon in our next session.